Before September 26th of 2018, Survivor had released 36 Survivor seasons in total. This marked 36 opportunities to hone and perfect their craft. 36 chances to explore new ideas, experiment with features, and see what does and does not work. And eventually, in the process, you get to establish a winning formula, and I really think that's true for anything in life. And in the realm of reality TV, I think a lot will say that about Survivor. This formula was discovered years ago, but it's actually here in today's episode that I believe the structure was finally perfected. For Survivor's 37th release, they took every concept, every idea that had made the series so loved, and it finally culminated into the most well thought out Survivor season of all time. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Survivor Retrospective. Get comfortable as we take a look at the one and only David versus Goliath. If you read the title, then you know the cat is already out of the bag, and I consider this one of the greatest Survivor seasons of all time. And because of that, I decided to switch up the format a little bit with this video and do the ranking at the very beginning, and we'll talk about how I got that score throughout the entire video. Survivor David versus Goliath is a 10 out of 10. Double S tier in our highest rated season. And now that we have that rating out of the way, I can explain why this is the perfect season of Survivor.
The greatest social experiment on television is back with a modern take on one of the most intriguing matchups of all time.
I think it says a lot about the quality of Survivor when almost 20 years after the very first season, we were still able to have our expectations blown away with what we are watching. Okay, some of you watching this might not have David vs. Goliath ranked as the best season of all time, but I would argue that 99% of the fan base would have this season somewhere in their top 5. Personally, this isn't my favorite season of all time, but putting my subjective opinions aside, I think objectively, nothing beats the 37th season of Survivor. So at the end of the day, the difference comes down to, although not being my personal favorite, it does the most things right to please everyone. If you've been following along on this Survivor Retrospective with me every day, then you might remember I consider Survivor Second Chance my favorite season of all time, ranking it 9.9 out of 10. It's important to touch on Survivor Second Chance in this retrospective because I believe in a lot of ways, this season tries to implement aspects of that season. From a more literal sense, this can be seen with the final immunity challenge being the same in both seasons. David vs. Goliath also cleans up some of the over-the-top decisions that production had for second chances that makes for a more polished final product, and a prime example with this is sticking with only having one tribe swap instead of having two. David vs. Goliath also takes huge inspiration from Millennials vs. Gen X, and although this comparison is not as obvious as the first one, it makes a lot of sense when you really think about it. It's no understatement to say Survivor was in the middle of a dry spell before airing David vs. Goliath, and they were in need of a serious win. Ghost Island and Survivor HHH both flopped and were not well received from the fan base. And while I am one of the main supporters for Game Changers, I do recognize that it is a season that is not well received by most people, meaning that Survivor hadn't seen a win since Millennials vs. Gen X, a season which also happens to be the introduction to the modern era of Survivor and the Fiji era of Survivor. After the success that Survivor Millennials vs. Gen X had, the rest of the seasons in this era really try to relive the magic, while the following 3 seasons after MGX were unable to capture the same magic. I believe David vs. Goliath was finally able to. The entire Fiji era of Survivor all exists on the same frequency, and in large part it's from the same location season after season. But there's a big difference between the hits of this era and the duds. Da 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 da! Say it with me. The characters are the most important part of a season. Am I starting to sound like a broken record? It's the characters that make or break a good season, and is the separating factor between the hits and the duds. And a big thing that David vs. Goliath, Second Chance, and Millennials vs. Gen X all have in common is they let the characters shine and let them play the game how they want to. It doesn't stop there, as all these seasons also don't have any overwhelming twist or game mechanic that takes away from what we are there to watch. Survivor.
39 days, 20 people, 1 survivor.
David vs. Goliath starts out with introducing us to the compelling theme that makes it easy to get invested into early. I give Survivor props for this, but it could have easily fallen flat on its head if turned out a little differently. From a narrative perspective, this season makes it inherently easy on who to root for. People love to cheer on the underdog, the hard worker, the hero, and the theme of the season starts out with one tribe of players that fit that example to a T. Just like how the tale goes, the tribes are broken down here from the Davids, which are the underdogs, and the Goliaths, which are the successful monsters. From the first few seconds of the premiere, it becomes clear what Jeff is going for here, as the tribes compete in their first challenge. But the twist is, the Goliaths get to pick the 2 weakest members of the Davids to compete in the challenge. Luckily enough, the tribe that we're told as fans to root for won the challenge, as the Davids beat the Goliath. But the Davids better cherish that moment, as they would be the underdogs for most of the game after that point. And right there, we have the risk of naming a season David vs. Goliath. See, I'm really scared to see what happens to this season if the Goliaths destroy the Davids throughout the entire game. That's not good storytelling. We were told from the very start of the season to root for the Davids and to root against into the Goliaths. So although I think the theme of the season is actually a huge success, I think Survivor got really lucky here, as it could have ended in a disaster if a few things would have happened slightly differently. The pre-swap of David versus Goliath. Normally, I would argue this is where we see the dullest part of an entire season. Nah, not in season 37, don't be crazy. Although during this portion of the game we have 4 players being sent home, we only end up going to tribal council 2 times. And that is because on day 3, Pat is medically evacuated from an off-camera boating accident, and on day 10, Bai quits the game with fear of her beat-up knee affecting her career as an MMA fighter. And without surprise, this lack of going to tribal council leaves us feeling with a lot to be desired. See, going to tribal council and voting people out is literally the main point of the show, and it easily produces drama, is compelling television, and allows the players to strategize. With medical evacuations or quits, we just don't get that. And so Survivor had an uphill battle from the very beginning of the season of attempting to tell a concise narrative. While I bet Jeff and the entire Survivor team would have preferred for the medical evacuation and quit to not have happened, it actually was a really good thing for the narrative. So although the season fails to set the tone with their opener in the conventional sense that we are accustomed to seeing, it actually allows for real character moments and new editing tricks that we are not used to seeing. 99% of the time, Survivor seasons, especially in the modern era, have so much content to fit in the episodes that sometimes we lose out on the real people moments. But without going to tribal council in the premiere, we instead get introduced to some real moments, and the episode actually gets a little room to breathe. Therefore, what might seem as originally a miss for the season, not going to tribal council in the first episode, actually becomes a real positive. And I want to highlight that for a second, because that very theme of changing a negative into a positive is shown throughout the entire season, as we're still discussing the early portions of the game, and Survivor has managed their setbacks perfectly. More on those fancy editing tricks though. This is season 37 of Survivor, and with that, every Survivor fan knows how idol searches work. First, the viewer watches a player hunt for the idol, and then the viewer watches the player find the idol. No, not this time.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
What starts out as a tribe idol hunt at the Goliath camp turns into disappointment as no one can find it. No one can find it until the camera cuts to Dan. Dan is explaining that he already found the idol. We then go to a flashback of Dan showing how he went about finding the idol. Give me more of this, Survivor. Good old tribe swap time. Or should I say tribe expansion. Say goodbye to David versus Goliath, as we are now mixing things up with 3 new tribes. What I think the best part about this is that we only have one swap throughout the entire pre-merge of the season. But once again, the Davids are at a disadvantage on all tribes. But because of horses and the fear of jackets, the Davids survived the next 2 tribal councils. And of course, Natalie Napalm has got to be up there for one of the most iconic pre-merge Survivor players of all time. Normally in these videos, I discuss the characters and the game separately, as I would normally only discuss 4 or 5 players throughout a season, but these players are so good, I'm scared to leave anyone out. Back to Natalie for a second though, as I just love the energy she brought to the season, and although I wasn't a fan of watching her when the season first aired, I love the philosophy she brought into the game. Natalie explained how she was going into the season as if it was her 3rd time or 4th time playing Survivor, as she was already 57 years old and isn't going to be coming back. Ultimately, it doesn't end up working out for her, obviously, but this level of intensity is what the entire cast of characters brings to this season. And is this really a David vs. Goliath YouTube video if I don't roll the clip?
Natalie, is there any way I could have your jacket? Nothing.
Why should I? I don't have to. And I chose not to, so I'm wearing it.
This part of the season is also very important as we get introduced to the idol nullifier, but more on that later. All in all, this was a really enjoyable pre-merge with so much fun to be had and interesting moments all the way through. Looking back at it, I'm having trouble finding any of these players where I would be really mad if they returned for a future season of the show. Like, I guess Jessica maybe, but all the other players I want back on my screen right now. The pre-merge of Survivor David vs. Goliath has a combo of both big moves and small moves. We have some fantastic blindsides, and we even have Survivor trying new things with how Dan found his idol. With 0 dull moments to be found here, I think that's a big reason why this is the fastest I've ever been to Survivor season. I finished season 37 of Survivor in 2 days. Not because I had to do it, but because I wanted to, and I was having so much fun with it the entire time. And trust me, things do not slow down once we hit the merge. Every single episode, the players are playing as hard as they can. We have the insane 12-1 vote against Elizabeth, which, can someone double check for me, but I'm pretty sure that's the most votes ever against a player at a single tribal council. This would be the calm before the storm, as no one wanted to draw the metaphorical and literal lines in the sand this early in the game. Trust me, a storm was coming and it was going to hit.
A massive storm is set to hit the islands in the next several hours. For your safety, we're going to evacuate you from your island.
No, not that storm. That was earlier in the season. We're coming up now with the Bro Chacho blindside, and that is one of my favorite blindsides of the entire season. Davey plays his idol for Christian to save him. Angelina begs Dan to play his idol for her, which he does. The Davids split their votes in the minority, and John goes home with a 3-0-0 vote on day 22 of Survivor, with 12 players left in the game. Wait, no, I lied. The next vote is even crazier. The Davids come together with all of their advantages to slingshot their way into a hopeful majority.
But we have a secret advantage where we can steal a vote. I found the idol.
I have secret advantages. I have idol nullifiers.
What do we play and when, and how many for this vote?
Just like the Avengers coming together for the first time against a greater threat, you knew things were beginning to get serious. With some crazy idol plays, nullifier action, vote steals, and split votes, the Davids are able to come up on top in this massive moment.
Person voted out and the third member of our jury, Dan.
Wait, no, I'm getting my votes mixed up and lied to you again, because the next episode is one of my favorites. This is where the true battle of David versus Goliath takes place, with the immunity challenge battle between Christian and Alec. I'm just gonna say it, I made a petition online to try and get CBS to post the full challenge online for us to watch. They even have Paramount Plus, so give the people what they want, and the people want a full uncut version of this challenge. We can call it Survivor David versus Goliath, the Christian cut. Check the link out in the description and go over to change.org to sign my petition. Share it on Facebook, share it on Reddit, share it on Twitter, share it wherever you can. Let's try and get 100 people to sign this petition.
Sort of thing we think about, like exoskeleton research.
Oh my God, bro.
Who's up for 20 questions? Hey, Probst, I'm starting to look at this as a different kind of opportunity, Jeff. You're kind of my captive audience. Do you know what a Reuben sandwich is, Jeff? You know what a macaron is, Jeff? Or like kind of like little tiny, little colorful sandwiches?
Christian, you're safe. I'm not.
I know. I know how you must feel in this moment. And I hear you. I might never get this opportunity again.
With Alec losing that challenge and getting voted out, the Davids finally had the numbers on day 28 of Survivor. So I really think they're going to be smart with this lead, and now that they have it for sure, 100% guaranteed they're not going to lose it, right? Yeah, no, that's way too easy, as the Davids drop fast with the rest of the tribal councils before the finale, as a David goes every single time. Carl turns on God mode thinking he had already won Survivor, Gabby gets a bad case of big move-itis, and Christian simply runs out of steam. Carl's fall from grace here is so sad and hard to watch, but I want to focus more on the Gabby and Christian votes here, and specifically their complicated relationship. A lot of stories focus on these two characters, and so we get to learn a lot about them throughout the season. I think Gabby got put in a really tough spot here, as she needed the bond with Christian for them both to continue to find success in the game. But Christian is just a bigger character, and people perceived him as the one making the decisions. On Survivor, perception is reality, and so Gabby has the right idea in needing to get Christian out in order to show that she was playing the game. But this opened up the possibility of all the other players removing both Christian and Gabby from the game.
Play with you? On the sand?
Do you want to play this game with me?
When have I ever indicated otherwise?
I know, I want to play with
6-player finales are always overwhelming, and so for the first time in the entire season, this episode felt really rushed to me, and I think it would have benefited from having either a 3-hour episode or a 5-player finale. Nonetheless, it's a great conclusion to an amazing season. In fact, I could possibly make an entire video on all these characters in the finale. Well, except for Allison. I'm not quite sure why Allison is this huge threat. Davey gets voted out on day 36, exposing Nick, which you think would be an issue here, but no. But don't worry, as Kentucky Nick would win every single immunity challenge in this finale. I can't believe it's actually taking me this long in the video to even mention Nick's game. Nick is a really strong Survivor player and deserves way more credit by everyone, me included. He could have been voted out first if it wasn't for Pat getting medevaced. He also has a top tier social game and a bizarre strategic game. I love the idea of giving every alliance a nickname to make them feel personal, and I don't really know how I feel about his idle fake play nonsense. If anything, all this does is prove that Nick Wilson is a super fan of Survivor who is playing hard. And on top of that, he wins all 3 of the final immunity challenge, meaning he's a strategic, social, and physical threat. Angela also does major Angela things here in the final episode of the season when she needs to climb Mount Everest in order to find a hidden immunity idol. This is great payoff from earlier in the season as Angela explained the stats of women in Survivor finding idols. I don't know what's more insane, Angela's ladder story, her deal she made with Jeff, her great jury management, or whatever this is. Mike drinks some wine, Kara loses the fire making challenge, Oh, the great fire making challenge. And with that, we enter the final tribal council where Nick wins in a 7-3-0 vote. This season is the top of the top tier, and just like how Jeff thanks the cast after every season is over, I just want to say thank you. Pat, Jessica, Jeremy, B, Natalia, Natalie, Larissa, Elizabeth, John, Dan, Alec, Carl, Gabby, Christian, Davey, Allison, Kara, Angelina, Mike, and Nick. Thank you for playing Survivor and giving it everything you had. Thank you, Jeff Probst and the entire production team for crafting this masterpiece. But eventually, all good things must come to an end, and so I want to touch on a few complaints I have with the season.
Failure. Just general failure.
Oh wait, no, this is the greatest season of all time. There are no negatives with it. And while I will say there are no true negatives, I do have a few nitpicks with the season. As mentioned earlier, I don't like how the underdog narrative was so forced onto the season. And with all the time we spend with Christian, it really hurts not having him make the final episode, as he comes up just one episode short. Other than that though, I'm really grasping at straws here to find anything at all that's negative. I hope one day in the future we can look back and see David vs. Goliath beats the Australian Outback for the record of most returning players.
This is Survivor, David versus Goliath.
With the last of my nitpicks out of the way, I would now like to talk about David vs. Goliath in a more overarching conceptual sense. We've talked about the details of the season, but I ask you, what is it that makes the season generally considered one of the greatest seasons of all time? I've thought about this for a while, and I think it really comes down to having range. And that is a thing of beauty. David vs. Goliath is so palatable, and this makes it perfect for casual and hardcores. It works so beautifully to allow viewers to get comfortable with the strategy and small moves without getting overwhelmed in the early game. It's not jarring from the start like Cambodia, and of course, again, it's got the range. It's got a great finale, amazing blindsides, a fantastic cast of characters, all wrapped into a very well laid out season. And I think most interesting to note is that David vs. Goliath doesn't necessarily have the best anything. Does it have the highest level of strategy? Well, a lot of Cambodia fans are going to debate that. The best newbie cast? It's certainly in the conversation, but Cagayan is there as well. The biggest moment? This season's got a lot of great moments, but the Black Widow Brigade has this one beat. Theme? It's not quite heroes versus villains, but it's better than a lot of the recent themes we have gotten in the modern era. See, I don't believe that David vs. Goliath is the best at anything. Maybe the characters, but certainly nothing else. See, what makes this the best season overall is that every single facet of the season is in the upper echelon. Almost everything in the season is at least the second best. There are hardly any weak spots to the season, and when they do exist, there are tiny little nitpicks, and so all the amazing content presented is what makes it so good. And so here we are. In a lot of ways, David vs. Goliath feels like it set out with the intent to be Second Chances 2.0, but it ended up finding its complete own identity. Second Chances was a strong conclusion to the Renaissance era of Survivor, and after Millennials vs. Gen X, Survivor had a hard time finding something that would work during the modern era. Millennials vs. Gen X is a strong start to the modern era of Survivor and feels like every season after it tries to chase that same feeling. And David vs. Goliath just made itself a season that is compatible for everybody by fine-tuning the over-the-top feeling of the modern era, and while also combining parts of Second Chance that people loved. Hardcore and casual fans alike love this season, and it's for a good reason. It's got every single base covered, and so I'd be inclined to call it not only the most well thought out season in Survivor history, but also the greatest as a whole. It might not be my favorite, but it does the best job of satisfying the most amount of people's needs for a season. Does it have flaws? I mean, of course, nothing is perfect, but nothing comes as close to perfection as this season. It took Survivor 37 seasons to get here, but we finally have reached the greatest season of all time. And so, with all that said, and coming full circle on this retrospective, it's so amazing to me that we're almost done this 40-day adventure that we set out to accomplish with this whole Survivor Retrospective series. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, comment down below how you rank this season and if it's your favorite of all time. And of course, subscribe to the channel. We're not going anywhere. I have more content coming once this series is finally completed. Who's excited for Survivor Season 41? We're so close. My final rating for Survivor David vs. Goliath is a 10 out of 10, double S tier, the greatest Survivor season of all time.